Hello and welcome to the podcast about geoeconomics. In this show, we explore the ideas shaping our world today connected with economy, politics, and technology. My name is Krzysztof Mazur, and I'm truly honored to welcome a very special guest, Wolfgang Münchau. Hello, Wolfgang, and it is a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, hello, Christoph, and thank you for having me here.
Wolfgang, you are a journalist, an economist, and author. Your latest book, Kaput, The End of the German Miracle, is a powerful critique of German economic model. And I don't want to ask you to summarize the book because I've already dedicated a full episode on this podcast to your book. If someone of the viewers missed it, now it's a good time to catch up. So I would like to use this opportunity to go deeper into some details. But let me start with the most interesting question, at least for me. How was your book received in Germany? Because it is a very uncomfortable critique of German elites, so probably you are now a kind of the persona non grata in German public debate.
You would have thought so, wouldn't you? But the book hasn't been published in Germany yet. So it's going to be published in July. And you beat the Germans to it, and you were actually one of the first non-English publishers to publish the book. So you were ahead, and you were faster in your response than the Germans, and that was part of the of what the book is about. So this is a sign that other countries are more agile. I mean, the Spanish were the first, I have to say, but Poland is certainly one of the first, amongst the first of the foreign publishers to publish this. So I would expect the reaction to be not as different from the way they were in the UK or in Poland, because what I'm writing or what I've written is outside of the framework of what is discussed in Germany. The German debate has positions that are in the left and the right, and also on the liberal center. And what they all have in common, and where they're all different from me, is that they all support the model, the economic model. The left wants higher taxes, more public investment. The right wants lower taxes, maybe less public investment, certainly fewer transfers, social transfers. But they all support the model. And the model consists very much of I'd say it's a state-organized capitalism with heavy institutional settings, like state-owned banks that give preferential money to certain industries, which explains why all the money always ends up at Volkswagen and other companies, while there isn't a capital market that allocates the country's massive surplus savings much more efficiently. I mean, here you think about this. This is one of the biggest exporter of savings in the world, Germany, generating massive savings. And these savings all end up either being invested abroad, or these savings end up in large companies. They do not end up in young entrepreneurial ventures. They do not get into private equity type operations. So the German model is very much based on this sort of state, very much an old state capitalist system. It's not a free market economy at all in terms of its entrepreneurial spirits. It has some regulatory freedoms, but a young entrepreneur, a new company that would start up in Germany, would not get the sense that it is operating in a free market. And there are very few people who support this. Even the liberals, who always talk about free market economics and freedoms, and for them freedom is the freedom speed on motorways. If you ask the liberals what are their three, the big thing that they achieved in the last coalition was to stop the introduction of a speed limit on the motorways, which is itself actually a regulatory thing. This isn't about freedom. The speed limit is to protect the car industry, to allow the car industry to regulate and to achieve a higher level of standards. Because if you have a car that goes at 250 kilometers on the motorway, it needs more expensive brakes. It needs more expensive suspension systems. So you are forcing the entire European market, including countries where cars are not where countries that do not have a speed limit, that do have a speed limit, you force everybody to the German standard because we are a single market, and Germany is the market which sets the benchmark. And this has happened throughout the period. The Germans set the benchmark. So the German model isn't a market industry model. The German model is very much a regulatory model, one where industry succeeded in harmonizing regulation. And this is why the single market has worked for Germany so well, because it became a market in which Germany was managed to impose its regulation on others, and that's why this game has stopped, and this is why I write Kaput. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it ended. The ability of Germany to do this has ended because the new generation of cars, for example, is a different product. It's not just a development of an old product, and it follows different rules. It doesn't follow the same regulatory standards that the old ones do. And to the extent that they do, these regulations are no longer set by Germany. So it's a very different proposition now. And therefore, I'm saying this model is broken. It has broken. It's not like I'm not saying it's about to break. It has broken. But in Germany, we have no discussion about this.
It's true that you are somehow an outsider, as you said. And I would say that you are an Anglo-Saxon observer of Germany, because you spent your many years working for the Financial Times, and I think also your style of writing is in line with very Anglo-Saxon tradition. And also, reading your book, I think that you are advocating for something closer to the Anglo-Saxon model. You just mentioned this much more free market approach, strong financial market, state which doesn't manage to the economy, and obviously the more dynamic digital innovation. And I'm wondering if there is a deeper, tradition you are linked to. I mean, Adam Smith tradition and free market economy tradition, as long as German economy is much more from Friedrich List tradition. Because you called this German model neo-mercantilist approach. And I think that Friedrich List was a founder of this approach in German economy. And for many, many decades, it was very successful for Germany. So could you elaborate it a little bit more? Do you feel, as an Anglo-Saxon observer of Germany, do you feel consider yourself as a Adam Smith grandson? And why Friedrich List was so successful for many decades and is not successful anymore, please?
Okay, we probably agree that he is not successful anymore.
In China,
and therefore, that's an important. Okay, but China has a system that works differently from the German system. The German system is a democracy. It does, we do have elections, and kind governments get kicked out, and it's a different system. The reason why mercantilism doesn't work in the modern world, or it also failed in the old worlds, is that in order to generate surpluses for a large country, this is not a small country. Germany is the third largest economy, and China is the second largest economy. So for the second and the third largest economy in the world to generate very, very large surpluses, it is important that the largest economy accepts very large deficits, because current account surpluses and current account deficits add to zero. We can all be successful, but we can't all have current account surpluses, because this is like a trade surplus, or somebody has to accept it. And we see right now in America is not accepting it. This is the tariff policy. But I wrote the book before Trump came to power. This was not a comment on Trump. The point I made, it was unsustainable. Unsustainable means, it doesn't mean it's a bad policy. It means it ends. It means it will end. It's not like I want it to end. It will end. And it's ending now because Trump imposes tariffs. It would have ended in other ways had he not come to power. It would have ended under Kamala Harris. She would not have imposed tariffs, but the ability and willingness of America to absorb other countries' surpluses has gone. Another country that was a big surplus absorber was Britain. And Britain absorbed surplus while it was in the EU. It does so less because it has less capacity to do so. So we have to sort of be clear about about these models always assume that you are very small and that the rest of the world is very large. And for small countries, that's indeed what it is. If you're an island, a small country in the world, you don't have to care about this stuff. But if you're Germany and you are, it was in 2018, Germany had a current account surplus of 8%, 8.5% of GDP. This is absurd, absurdly high. And this can only work if other countries do the same. And China has now taken over. You're absolutely right about China. China is doing the German thing. But China is doing it with more force and much more manpower, literally more people, and a government policy that is so authoritarian and so lopsided, also not sustainable. This cannot be sustained. This is what it means. And if America no longer absorbs these surpluses, if we're getting to a position where America, I'm not saying balances the budget, but no longer agrees to run these very large current account deficits, then this game will stop. It has to stop. And therefore, the model that relies on generating surpluses will end. This is not a question of political ideology. It's nothing to do with the fact that I spent a lot of years in the UK. It is the fact. It's a question of arithmetic. That something that we can have long discussions about what causes the global imbalances, whether it was Germany and China or whether it was America. This is a complex issue, and it's probably the answers are probably quite nuanced. But what is clearly an undisputed fact is that if countries refuse to accept current account deficits like the United States, it will be impossible for China and Germany to generate those surpluses. And it's not, and if China succeeded, then Germany has to fail. And it cannot, in this triangle, they cannot all do this when it has to add to zero. So that is the quintessential. So if you want to reduce my argument, my book is written for a large audience. It has a macroeconomic part, but if you wanted to do a macroeconomic discussion about the book, you're talking about international. It's a balance of payments argument. Basically, it's a follow the money argument. You're looking at the financial account and the capital account and its composition. You're looking at how it changes, how savings and investment patterns changed in the economy. And the argument is basically to say that an economy that generates surpluses can in the long run require a willing accomplice or a group of willing accomplices. Now that doesn't mean that Germany can't export. You can still be a very successful export nation, but we're talking about surpluses. We're not talking about exports here. So if Germany, imported it as much as it exported, there wouldn't be a problem for this because there would be a counterbalance to GDP. In 2018, it's still even now that the current account surplus, I think last year it was at 6.5%. Imagine what it would take for Germany to balance the budget. They would have to import by 6%. And the country would have a massive depression if it ran a balanced current account. Now, just think about this statement for a second. If Germany runs a balanced current account, it would be in depression. Now, that tells you that the model is broken.
I agree with you that this model is not balanced, but I think that you can argue that from many perspectives you can critique this model. And your critique is a typical, I would say, Anglo-Saxon liberal critique. And I would like to put right now on the table a different one, much more leftist, you could say, that this model is imbalanced in a different sense, that society suffer too much. I obviously linked right now to this famous Petit and Klein book about trade war as a class war, and when they critique German economic model as a model which is based on wage suppression and labor market discipline. So it wouldn't be an argument that it is imbalanced because United States could say stop, but it is imbalanced because German workers could say it is not in our interest anymore. And somehow I think in your book it is a missing perspective. It is not so much about this approach. Why? And doesn't mean that still you are rather on this neoliberal paradigm and position. And that's why you don't use this more leftist argument and more leftist critique.
Well, the left in Germany supported the model as it is, and the left in Germany has supported the surpluses. But I'm actually the book tries to tell the story. The book doesn't make a political argument. The book tries very much just to tell the story of how this, the world's most successful economy got to the point. It doesn't actually say what we need to do. I accept this very explicitly, that I'm not going to give policy recommendation, because you can solve it on the left and you can solve it on the right. I completely agree that you can solve it by more consumption. For example, if Germany had not imposed on itself a debt brake, but had basically pursued a much more balanced fiscal policy, one that wasn't designed to bring debt down, but that would have been more designed to be sustainable, it would have had maybe 90% debt to GDP, what the UK has today, instead of 60% of GDP. And these 30% of GDP would have been, could have been invested, could have been consumed. And the German current account surpluses would have been lower by a very significant margin. There are positions on the left that can do this. So I have not in the book taken a view of the left or the right. It's not a neoclassic. It's not a neoliberal. I'm not a neoliberal, by the way. This is an accusation that has rarely been levied at me. The perspective that I have from my sort of work in America, in the United States, and in the UK for a long time, and is certainly that we look at economic systems over there in the United States, in the United Kingdom. We look at economic system from a sort of bigger view. I mean, you mentioned Michael Petty's book. It's a brilliant book, by the way, on the global imbalance, and I think it also informed my understanding of why the global imbalance is better viewed from the perspective of savings and investments than from the perspective of goods. The Trump way of looking at this is quite wrong. In fact, because it mischaracterizes the dynamics. The goods are, there are imbalances in the goods markets, but this is not because of trade. Or trade policies. This is because of underlying macroeconomic imbalances that have arisen in policies, like the Eurozone policy. This was a policy of austerity. What the Eurozone did, it saved at the expense of the rest of the world. And that was the moment when the whole of the Eurozone went into surplus by imposing austerity. I very much described at the time the austerity in the Eurozone as the biggest policy error of my lifetime. Now, that's not a criticism of the right, is it? Because the right supported austerity. The right always supports austerity, and I didn't. And I do not, I actually believe there should be stimulus right now. So that's very much my thinking. But I think especially if you argue it from the perspective of the left, I would say that the policy designed to balance the current account would probably come to your advantage. But then the question arises, can you maintain a large industrial model? And this is where the left is conflicted. The left has its voters in industry. So if you opened up and said, look, if we change, if we actually accept more spending, and more investment, public sector investment, private sector investment, if you accepted a more balanced position, we may not be able to maintain industrial structures like those at Volkswagen. And we'll have to let go of them. So this is not something you can do at the same time. This is where it becomes, it's not an unholy trinity, but it's sort of a duality that is not possible. You cannot maintain Volkswagen subsidies and keep this company basically as a sort of a semi-state owned nirvana and expect to close your current account surplus. So you need you need to kind of choose. And the left in Germany has chosen the corporatist side. It hasn't chosen. It's not really the left, actually. The left would a proper left. If you read Niemcy, for example, now Niemcy wouldn't care about industry. He didn't care about investment. Actually, he cared about consumption. He would have used the state much more actively, and that's not possible today for many also legal reasons. Western constitutions developed in a way that would make Niemcy impossible. But if you just take it sort of as a theoretical model, there's nothing in the left that is intrinsically in pro-industry, and in fact Keynes was not particularly interested in it either, and Keynes's view on economy were pretty much capitalistic, though he favored a very strong involvement of the state, and he would have absolutely abhorred policies like that of the German left to actually achieve and celebrate large export surpluses or current account surpluses. So I think the argument is cannot be reduced as sort of a thing, a debate on the right. Most of the policy mistakes that were made in the German politics were made at the right of center. Look at Schröder. Schröder was on the right of center. He wasn't a party of the left, but he was definitely a politician of the right. Angela Merkel. These were the personas in my book that I criticized. The left was pretty much, at most, complicit, but the left was not the driver of this. The policy mistake, the industrial subsidies, this whole system was very much in Germany. The dominant party in Germany is the CDU. Over the years, that's the party that's been running Germany for most years. It's the party that is running most states. This is the dominant party, and that's a party of the right. It's not a party of the left. So my criticism of Germany is not a criticism of the German left. Maybe a criticism of the SPD. That's a different matter. But the SPD is not the kind of left that you were talking about.
In your book, the whole elite, left and right, they are the part of the same neo-mercantilist approach. And I think that as an outsider, as you said, you critique the whole system. So I think that my question wasn't about links to the particular left or right parties in the Germany, but more about your intellectual, let's call it, foundation. But let's move, make another step, and I would like also ask you about this digital economy. You write a lot about how Germany are not a leader of the third industrial revolution, how they missed digital revolution, and my probably provocative question would be, maybe it is an effect of the Second World War and demilitarization of the Germany, because when you look closer to the Silicon Valley and the whole infrastructure, digital infrastructure in the United States, from semiconductors to the internet, you would say that it was originally driven by military needs, like Apollo project or DARPA. And for Germany, it was a failure to develop this strong digital sector because there was no such a challenge like Vietnam, Korea War, and others. So maybe it is a clear example that without a lot of financial support for military goals, there would be no really breaking new technologies. Could you agree with this?
Absolutely, I completely agree with this. I also write this in the book, how Germany having Jewish scientists in Germany having invented quantum mechanics, made the first steps in quantum mechanics and discovered this, and then were persecuted. Most of them left Germany, leaving Germany devoid of a technology that was then developed in the United States. At no point would I criticize modern Germany for having failed to invent the semiconductor. That was obviously not possible. The mistake Germany made was is not to use the technology. and not to embrace it. It's not to be, Germany invented the car and, it milked this for a very long time. It didn't invent the semiconductor, but you can still benefit from the computer. We all do. We're having this conversation. None of us invented anything. So basically, the benefit of Paul Krugman once said a very wise thing about exports and imports. He knows a thing or two about trade. He said that the benefit of trade doesn't come from exporting; it comes from importing, because importing allows you to do things, to consume things that you would otherwise not be able to make. Or willing to make, or this is the benefit, and this is the same with digital technology. The main benefit of digital technology is not the fact that you have Silicon Valley. Now, granted, they make a lot of money, and it's good luck to them. But there is a second best strategy, and my criticism is that we didn't take the second best strategy. And the second best strategy is to take part in a party. It's just to turn up and say, look, we enjoy this, we're going to do this, we're going to use this technology to advance. We develop it as we can if we see any niches for us, and that's perfectly sensible. And AI opens many development possibilities for companies, so you don't have to be the inventor of the original things. And there's actually quite a few German original inventions. The difficulty we have with these technologies is not so much that we missed out at the beginning of the food chain. The big problem is that we are basically failing to generate business models that use this technology, and that is the big failure in German, generally European business models, that we're not that good with this. And the question then becomes, why did this happen? Why did companies? I go through this question very sort of in detail in my book. When did Germany, which was the Germany of my youth, was different. It was very much innovation. It was very much, the Germany in the 70s was a Germany of explorers, science. I mean, in schools, this was a big deal. Everybody thought Germany was the cutting edge of science. It wasn't quite true anymore, but Germany was still pretty much right up there in the world in science, technology, certainly in engineering. They were certainly the top engineers in the world. And that kind of, and this sort of, this lead, they lost this lead, and I think it has a lot to do with an arrogance, like we are the best. If it's not made by us, it's not good. And I think I see a lot of that mentality in German boardrooms. For example, when digital technologies came, the decision makers in large companies were mostly in denial. And I see this again and again, that big business people don't say, instead of saying, okay, the Chinese have done something really interesting, for a long time, the Chinese were basically what the German car makers, the executives said, the Chinese don't know how to make cars. That was the story they were telling themselves. And when, Ferdinand Piëch, the patriarch of the German car industry, he was a member of the Porsche family, legendary chairman of Volkswagen, when he said there's no space, and that's only 10 years ago when he said it, there's no space for electric cars in my garage. Now, he has a big garage, huh? When there's no space for electric cars in his garage, then it becomes uncool for virtually everybody who works in that industry to drive an electric car. Because if the boss hates it, you're not going to buy one, are you? So you're basically, and you say the same thing, because that's what leadership does. And he led Germany, he led his company in the wrong direction, and the government said the same. Everybody in Germany said the same. And this is the thing about what these sort of consensual, corporatist institutions do. When they get it wrong, they really get it wrong. The reason why China is successful at the moment, that they have been getting it right. They went into electric cars because no one did, and they did. And that was a good decision. I mean, commercially a good decision. But we have to basically remember, we haven't had much luck with this. Airbus was a great success. Airbus was an exception, and there were very unique circumstances that made Airbus a success. Look at what the last German government tried. They said, okay, we have to get the semiconductors. We have to get the batteries. These were terrible investments because the semiconductors never came because Intel couldn't deliver. Northvolt went bankrupt. and Germany actually lost money because they didn't protect themselves against this. We have a bad record of this type of industrial business. We're not good at this anymore, and if you have an industry that no one in the industry is everybody is in the same consensus. This is a big deal in Germany. Consensus, everybody has to agree. And markets would normally, one of the things that markets do, and you don't have to be a neoliberal to accept that. Keynes accepted that. Markets allow you to express minority opinions and put money behind a minority view. And that didn't happen in Germany. They picked the wrong technology, and no one put any money behind any minority view. And after I wrote the book, I got letters from people who were inside these big companies who developed electric cars, who were engineers, and they were fired or pushed aside. It was a society that at the time discriminated against, kind of whistleblowers. It was a culture that doesn't encourage this type of dissent. Now, and you can argue this from the left or from the right. I am actually not fairly agnostic here. I'm merely saying this cannot work and this is not sustainable and it is breaking down.
And you just describe how elites lead in a bad direction. Also, you describe a lot about this. A big part of your book is about this tight interlinks of politics, business, and finance. And I'm wondering. You mentioned that it is just a diagnosis. You don't want to make any suggestion about policies. But I have to ask you, do you really believe that these elites could change without, political revolution, without a major crisis? Because it is in your book, according to your book, these links are so tight that I think that only shock could change the whole approach.
I agree. Shock will change it, or the absence of shock won't change it. I think people always have this assumption that something has to change, and change is actually the exception. Change is not the rule. I mean, I don't know many countries that changed business model. Very rare. We have very few examples. Thatcher did when she came to power. Hugely difficult and controversial, and there's a lot of pushback from inside her own party. I mean, it was not something that was easily done. Reagan did to some extent, but it was nothing nearly as extreme as what Thatcher did. I haven't seen much. Milei maybe in Argentina, maybe that's a big pushback on a business model. Quite rare that this is possible. In Germany, it cannot be done because the constitution basically makes this impossible. There's no way that any German politician would ever get the majority. I mean, you see, Friedrich Merz, he campaigned on an agenda of, as you would call it, neoliberal, tax cuts, the classic stuff. And then he came to, and he does, the coalition agreement is pretty much the same that Angela Merkel would have agreed. And he always criticized Angela Merkel for this. He does the same thing now. And, I don't, there's certainly no change. There's no model change. There's going to be an exemption of VAT for restaurants. And the diesel subsidy for farmers will be reintroduced. That's the kind of stuff that Germany. There will be a subsidy for electricity prices. It's that petty. It's that that's what they will do now. And nothing that would qualify as a reform. It's certainly just a classic pork barrel. I get something, you get something type coalition agreement. Now, they're not going to change it. And my standard scenario is that Germany will decline. It's as simple as that. It's a rich country. I'm not advocating that, but I fear that this is what happens, because if you wanted to change, there would have to be... I would say, if you think it will change, wouldn't there be one political party somewhere on the political spectrum that wanted to change it? And there isn't. The left supports the model. If you ask Sarah Wagenknecht, she wants to return to industry because, as she said, this is what we're good at. So she wants old industry. She wants the pipeline back, the Russian pipeline. If you go to the far right, they also want the pipeline back, and they also want the industry back because that's what we're good at. And now we have the government of the center that support the same industries because that's what we're good at. Look, someone's got to want to change this. Now, in 1970s Britain, there was Thatcher who wanted to change it. She was in a minority. Nobody thought she had a chance, but she, eventually she got to power. If I don't see anyone on a distant horizon in the German political spectrum, I can pretty much confidently predict it's not going to happen. And, decline, societies decline. Look at Japan. Japan has been declining for 30 years. The country's still, functioning. It's no longer the third largest. Germany, by the way, overtook Japan, not because it did anything great, but simply because of, demography. And, they were always sort of so close to each other that Germany eventually, leapfrogged Japan. I mean, Japan is a functioning country. It's a democracy. It's, if you go to Tokyo, it's a wonderful place, a wonderful city. There are rich people. Not as successful as they once were. I mean, in the early 1990s, Japan was relatively massively successful. And people projected this into the future. They didn't see what was happening. And demography is a big factor is a bigger factor in economics than we thought. I was actually myself in denial of that fact for a very long time. But I think you see this very clearly in Japan, despite they tried all the policies of the left. I mean, they tried QE to the extreme. They tried all that. Nothing has actually produced growth. And Germany, I would see the same. I mean, unless there is a shock to the system, and I cannot see this shock coming. I mean, there's always a shock that the kind of which we don't like and want, and certainly not wish, like a war or something. That obviously could do something. Maybe the Trump shock will change things. Now, you could have a situation where instead of having gradual decline, you could have a sudden stop. Like, if Trump's tariffs would actually produce a global recession, and that would, lead to the bankruptcy or the collapse of some parts of the German economy, maybe that will change the things. Maybe my book will make a difference. Who knows? My book hasn't been published. It will be published in July. We'll see what people say. I don't expect it to have the same sort of positive reception that I had in Poland, for example. But it's something where could be. Who knows? I'm not. Maybe some people say, "Well, actually, the guy has a point." But maybe they think, the guy doesn't know anything about Germany, or he's just an Anglo-Saxon liberal who is just trying to get his sort of City of London orthodoxy based on it, which absolutely is not the case, because there are quite a few books actually written in the UK about Germany that took a very different position from what I did. And so I was, it's not, I wouldn't say that I'm particularly Anglo-Saxon. I have certainly my British friends don't characterize me that way.
Okay, a few more questions, if I may. You mentioned about Friedrich Merz, and we both agree that he wouldn't be, someone who will break this neo-mercantilist model. I think he's a part of the elite, and the model would be exactly the same as it was in the previous years. But one thing is really striking my attention, because for me it is very difficult to understand that someone with such a long track record in the BlackRock could be a chancellor of the Germany. How is it possible that someone who for many years was just a part of the biggest, the largest asset management, whose main goal was to acquire stakes in German companies, right now during such a huge struggle between United States and Germany, became a chancellor. Do you think that the question about economic sovereignty and conflict of interest should be asked here, or is not related?
Well, maybe it's the Anglo-Saxon conspiracy taking over now.
For the outsider,
I don't think it's a big problem. I don't think it's I don't mind where people work from. I think I personally believe it's healthy that people enter politics basically as an outsider. The political Berlin thinks it's very strange that this man never held office before. I don't mind that. I don't think this is particularly important characteristic of a leader. So the idea of we having career politician doing the same thing is not particularly enticing. And we'll see whether he is a good leader or not. I mean, I'm actually keep an open mind. He might, through the experience in the private sector, might have given him a different perspective that many politicians have lacked. I mean, virtually every German chancellor had no problem. Gerhard Schröder had a private sector experience, but Angela Merkel never did. Helmut Kohl never did. They never worked in the private sector. So this might give him, an ability, and he might. He's certainly, aware of certain things. I listened to some of his stump speeches during the election campaign. He said a few things that I said. He said the model was broken. The model where Germany would just import stuff from China, put made in Germany on, and then exports it to the rest of the world for twice the money. He said that model worked for a long time, but it's no longer working. So there are, and he also talked about the lack of AI and the lack of interest in this. He hasn't really done anything about this, so I'm not expecting him to do anything about this. And he is leading a centrist coalition government, very much like Angela Merkel did. I would think that there is certainly no corruption involved. I mean, the reason he became, he tried to, this is the third time. I mean, it was Wolfgang Schäuble who was sort of his mentor. He brought him back from the wild into the politics, and he didn't hold any office. He was just back in the CDU, basically. He was basically a politician, a full-time politician again. He became an MP. And I remember the 2016 elections, 2017 elections, he became an MP. And so he had a platform. He talked, and he ran for leadership and lost. Then he ran for leadership again and lost again. So he was there, and then the CDU burned through a number of leaders. They had this disastrous campaign in 21, which they lost. And then they voted for him because he was sort of literally the last man standing. And they wanted something else, somebody who was not Merkel, and who didn't say, I am in the tradition of Merkel. They realized they needed something else. And, he was fresh. And, Merz was, we have to also remember what he was. Merz is a corporate lawyer by training. He's not a investment banker. So Merz worked for BlackRock. I don't know exactly what he did, but as a corporate lawyer for BlackRock, you structure deals. That's what you do. You structure agreements, but you're not really the wheeler-dealer, commercial, Larry Fink type character. That's not what Merz is. But Merz has, obviously, through this work, understood something. So I'm keeping an open mind on the guy because there's so little I know. I'm not expressing hope that he will be good because I don't know whether he will be. My expectation is that he will. I've seen him folding. I've seen him making promises he doesn't keep. I've seen him change his mind. I've seen him making very populist interventions like he did on the refugees, and was in fact stupid what he did in the winter when he basically aligned himself with the agenda of the AfD on the refugees, because what happened is that it didn't work for him politically, and he lost he had a story to tell on the economy. And the story is that, look, we have to actually discuss, a different way of doing business. That had a certain, at least this wasn't it wasn't a racist. It wasn't an anti-immigrant. It was a positive agenda. It was also a point where he was kind of unique in the political spectrum. I still don't think he kind of had he was focused enough on the model and on like doing things differently. And, as I wrote in the book, the financial sector is hugely important to this. And I think that's where I would start. If you have the same banking system at the moment, this banking system is not possible. So I wouldn't start with sort of that. That's where I would start. I would start with the European Capital Markets Union. So something that would be actually take place outside of Germany. That would probably have the biggest impact. Now, if you I keep an open mind on the guy. I would not assume that just because he had that background he would fail. But I think, he is a temperamental guy. He is emotional, prone to change. These are not great qualities in a leader. So he will actually have to demonstrate that he can stay a course, that he can think strategically and act strategically. I have not seen him do that in opposition, and that's something where I worry, and that's makes me slightly nervous about him.
Mm-hmm. 34% of CDU voters feel betrayed because he's shifting the position about fiscal policy. So I think it's another signal that the future could be difficult for him. But final topic I would like to mention with you is about Central and Eastern Europe. I have to ask about Poland, because it's obvious context also of our discussion. Why CEU is missing from your narrative? Because from our perspective, German investments in our region was an important part of this neo-mercantilistic model you describe, because it was, skilled labor, proximity, stability, and I think that part of this quiet engine for German industry was CEE region. So why you miss this part of the world from your narrative?
I mean, my narrative. I did mention the importance of the events that led to Germany to regain industrial competitiveness, and that was a factor. An important factor. It was also the Russian gas. It was also the exchange rate devaluation that took place 10 years later in the euro. Or not 10 years later. It actually started in 2007 in the global financial crisis, and that continued through the eurozone crisis. So I mentioned this, but this look. I wrote the story. This is not. I'm not trying to explain everything that happened to the world. It's not. I'm not trying to dismiss. This is a story that many people wouldn't have believed. The idea that the German model isn't working, because most people assumed, in Poland too, that the German economic model is well functioning. It had a high reputation, but people haven't quite seen. And people see that Germany has difficulties. People see the numbers, but people haven't kind of seen this. I wanted to explain this. Why this is no longer working, and why, and the point I was making, it was already not working when Poland joined the EU. The fact that Poland joined the EU and other things happened, I list the whole thing. East European enlargement was massively important for this model to have an extended lifeline, because it helped. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, and it helped Germany industry need to cut costs, and it was perfect for them. So Germany was great in favor of enlargement for that reason. The supply chain revolution changed the way corporates worked, and that allowed them to diversify, and not only into Eastern Europe. Then came the next phase to diversify into China. That was a very big thing. The Russian energy put the gas, they thought, would put the gas supplies on a secure long-term footing. The euro crisis brought devaluation of the euro, but a real devaluation, which is quite rare. Most devaluations in the world are nominal devaluations. You just end up with higher inflation. Germany didn't. Germany actually improved its terms of trade against the rest of the world. It was a fantastic boom to the German economy. So that everything went right for them for a period of like 10 years. From 2005 to 2015, the German economy boomed, not because of what it did. It boomed to a serious, gambler's luck. That was what it was. It was like gambler's luck. You had a great streak of luck, followed by a great streak of bad luck. I mean, it's like having, 5 heads followed by 5 tails. And that's the situation. It's an unusual sequence of gamblers' fortunes. But this is essentially what happened. And I think the average is kind of what it is. What a normal straight. Germany would not have been seen so successful in the first 10 years of this decade, and they would have been. And I think the downturn was that for that reason more pronounced. I see the German decline not dramatic. I'm not saying this country will collapse or nothing like that. It'll be like Japan. It'll be going down, and whereas Poland goes up. I mean, Poland grows 3 to 4%. and Germany grows by 0.5%, and that's still the catch-up process is very long, but eventually you're getting closer, and it's you one day you will visit a German town and no longer see any differences. And even though, and I think, don't forget that a lot of German wealth is concentrated among some very, very, very rich families. German wealth is not equally distributed. Germany has this reputation of being very sort of fair and equally distributed. It's one of the unequal wealth distributions in the world, in the Western world. As America is now getting with this billionaires, getting in this. Well, Germany had billionaires, before it was fashionable to have billionaires. The Aldis, the Albrecht brothers, and all these big families in in Munich and Stuttgart and Hamburg. I mean, massive, absolutely massively rich people who own a lot of money, and who own a lot of property, and I mean, it is so we should be analyzing those data a little bit more carefully, because the average German is not particularly rich, and certainly not asset rich.
Okay, it's very interesting that you, when you describe failures, you say that it is a mistake and a broken model. When you describe wins on success, you said that it is good luck. Okay, it's an interesting approach. I think that I asked about the CEE as a part of the story, because I think that it was one of the good decisions of your elites to open for Eastern Europe and to treat it as a backstage. But let's finish this topic. And my final question is, what you would suggest to Polish viewers and for Polish politicians how to interpret your book? Because if we agree that this model is broken, if we agree that there is a high potential, there is a high probability that this model wouldn't be, in easy way, you cannot fix it. How the strong partners of Germany should now change their perspective, because for many years, for Polish economy, there was a perspective like wagon hitched to the German locomotive, and we just have to be a part of this supply chain of German companies, and it is the easiest way to be successful. Yeah, right now, somehow your broken model broke also our model, and it is an open question. How? What is the solution? Yeah, for us, for Europe as a whole. What's your answer on it?
I think the answer is European. It's not sort of I mean Germany will still have companies. It's not like these will go, and there's no reason for German companies necessarily to let go of their Polish supply chain or the Chinese supply chain unless there are some external reasons for them to do so. So I'm less worried about Poland than I am about the decline of industry inside of Germany itself. But you're absolutely right. If you, to the extent that you are dependent on Germany, and there are great dependencies, obviously Germany is your largest trade partner, it will affect Poland. And the advice is to diversify, and that's the same as I gave to Germany. The model broke very early on, because it is it was already starting to break in 2004. The digital revolution was pretty evident in that period. It was already pretty evident at that time that it was a serious revolution, in the sense that it gave rise to serious businesses. So it should have been reformed back in those days, but the reforms they did was mostly about money, about competitiveness, about making it cheaper to produce, and this is where East Europe came in. And I have to say, history is what it is, and people did what they did. It was certainly great for Eastern Europe. It wasn't great for Germany, because if the Germans had reformed their economy back then, they would have been in a better situation than today, because I think they lived for like another 10 years in the delusion that their model isn't broken, because it was at that point generating generating income. It couldn't have succeeded. It was already clear. I think I wrote a book then that was not very successful. Why the model was born was far too early in the time. And I said, look, you need a model that is much more open and diversified and resistant to shocks. And I think there are things, expressions like resilience, flexibility, or thriving on chaos. You can talk about those terms, and I think these are qualities that are quite important in this world. That you have the flexibility to switch, not to switch models, and I don't think there is a need for Poland to switch its model. I think Poland has a very successful model. What I think should, however, happen is that everybody needs to think about, Europe needs to think about its dependency, and Poland needs to think about its dependency, and it's probably better for Poland not to be dependent on Germany, but more sort of part of broader European supply chains. And I think that, Europe is large, and Europe is sort of Europe will provide stability where Germany is weak, and the whole of Europe isn't weak. So I think there is viable business. There's no reason for Poland not to succeed just because Germany is failing to reform. I don't see any reason unless Poland tries to emulate Germany, which I don't see actually happening.
Okay, thank you. And I'm really curious what will be the reaction on your book in Germany. And I cross my fingers that there will be a huge debate about it.
I hope so too.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Wolfgang.